Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Canada's Role in the Future of Food, with Dr. Lenore Newman. To help situate you, we are actually streaming to YouTube live from Loyola, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities to examine research questions and projects in development here at the university. We are running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat if you're joining us here by Zoom. And for those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know by raising a hand and we'll get a microphone to you. With that, it is now my pleasure to hand it over to SynBio App's training manager, Orly Weinberg. Orly, over to you.
In the interests of time, we're going to get going. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodian of lands and waters on which we gather here today. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. It is my very great pleasure today to present Dr. Lenore Newman. Lenore is Director of the Food and Agriculture Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley, where she holds a full professorship and research chair in food and agricultural innovation. Lenore is a past research chair in food security and the environment and an emeritus professor of the Royal Society of Canada's New College. Lenore consults with industry in the areas of controlled environment agriculture, alternative proteins, and rare fruits and vegetables. She is the author of Speaking in Cod Tongues and the award-winning Lost Feast. With Dr. Evan Fraser from the University of Guelph, she has published Dinner on Mars in 2022 and Cellular Agriculture, Technology, Society, Sustainability, and Science in 2023. Dr. Newman sat on the BC Premier's Food Security Task Force and regularly consults with the BC government on policy related to agriculture and the ag tech industry. She holds a BSc in physics from the University of British Columbia and a PhD in environmental studies from York University. And since her co-author, Evan Fraser, kindly gave me a copy of their book, I do have to pitch it and say that the two of them make a wonderful dynamic team, and it comes through in their writing. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book recently, and it caused me to giggle out loud in opportune places and in public. So it was a wonderful read, and I'm sure you're all going to enjoy listening to Lenore Newman this afternoon. So thank you, Lenore. If there's anything else you want to add about yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm always whenever I hear that intro, I always feel like, boy, I'm glad I wore shoes today. I sound fancy. And that's not a given in British Columbia. A lot of socks and sandals go out there, and I almost leaned that way, and I'm like, nah, I'm out east, I better wear shoes. But really glad to be here. But the only thing I'll add, I've had a really I've had a fun career. Was born into a food family. We owned a fish company. I grew up on a halibut boat. And once you've grown up on a boat, you're just never going to be normal. And so you got to lean in. That's sort of what I've done. And I've had the great fortune to work in industry, to work in academy, and to also dabble with government, mostly by yelling at them. And I've always felt the most exciting places to be are in the middle and at the margins and on the edges of things. And it's a really interesting time in this field. And sometimes people ask me, why food? How the heck did you take physics and turn it into food? Partly it is growing up in a food family, but at the end of the day, no matter what happens, no matter how badly we screw up this world, if the food system fails, we fail. If we keep the food moving, we're okay. And in a time of crisis, food becomes the most important industry. And the truth is, it always is so. We just forget that sometimes until it stops working. It's a great time in agri-food technology. And there's all sorts of fascinating, challenging shifts in the environment with climate change and with the global geopolitical landscape that are challenging the ways we've done things. We have just lived through an amazing period in the food system where for a little while everything was kind of easy. Not easy, but easier than it had been. And that is failing. And technology, though, is accelerating in a way that might be really interesting. So, as mentioned, I run an institute in the Fraser Valley, which is BC's farm country. And I'm partnered with Guelph Sorel Institute, not just writing books about Mars, but planning out how to build national level agricultural technology impact in Canada with both policy and technology. And so what I want to do first in the time we have, and I'm well aware I'm taking you away from a most gorgeous day. So you've made a life choice to be in this room today, and I hope I can make it pay off for you, because I'm kind of like, oh, that's really nice out. If I was a student, I'd be out there. But in any case, I'm glad you're here. So starting with the technology, we're going to start now and we're going to move forward in time. So starting with a right now technology, particularly important to British Columbia, which is controlled environment agriculture. BC is interesting. We often run short of produce because we're at the end of the California chain. Basically, all the produce grows in the Salinas Valley, gets put on trucks, comes up, people take the good stuff off as it goes along, and eventually a truck rolls into BC with a bunch of wreckage that we then try and eat. And the Premier asked me and my colleagues, how do we not do this? How do we grow it here year round? So I think this is just fascinating. And I just actually toured the farm in this picture, which, full disclosure, I'm also a part founder of, called Avery Family Farms, that is an ebb and flow hydroponic technology growing head lettuce based on Japanese technology. And the idea is, could we grow head lettuce that was better, tasted better, looked better, longer shelf life, more nutrition, that people actually wanted to eat, and sell it for a comparable price in BC. Our price point in BC that I'm trying to meet here, wholesale, is about $2 a head. And that's a challenge. In the terms of physics, it's an optimization problem. And we're currently in pilot mode here, 1,100 heads a day that we're actually just giving to the food bank. But in a few weeks, we'll be ramping up to 14,000 heads a day, or about 2 tons a day, that will be sold into the giant empire that is Loblaws, etc. And will start appearing on British Columbia shelves, displacing the carbon-intensive California terrible product. Why am I interested in this? Well, As I mentioned, I was a member of the Premier's Task Force on Food Security, and we talked a lot about how could we domestically increase consumption in BC of leafy greens and small fruits, because the product from California was of such poor quality, we were getting pass up. People were coming in wanting to buy lettuce to the store, looking at the lettuce and saying, no, I'm just going to buy a box of Frosted Flakes. I'm not paying $7 for a head of lettuce that is clearly substandard, because people are smarter than we give them credit for. And so we know that we get better health outcome. And of course, people want the product if we could do this. And I've worked with several vertical operations. I've worked with venture capitalists at pretty well all points of this, watching this go from Star Trek doesn't quite exist to pretty soon we're going to grow most of our leafy greens indoors on site locally because it makes sense. And as I am a professor, at least some days, I now get to indulge in my favorite activity, which is going off on a crazy tangent, which takes us all the way to the island of Capri. And this is the ruins of the Villa Jovis. And from this villa, the Emperor Tiberius ruled the empire. He decided Rome was kind of crummy. People knew where he was. They could bother him all the time. And the weather wasn't as good. It was hot or cold. So he moved to Capri and built a palace on top of the mountain. So you had to really want to see the emperor if you wanted to bug him. But he had a problem. And, well, let's be clear, Tiberius had a lot of problems that became everyone else's problems because, and that's important, this is the birthplace of modern controlled environment agriculture, which I just love. Because there's Tiberius, and he suffered health problems, probably from overindulging in the things emperors tend to overindulge in. And his doctors recommended he eat a fresh cucumber every day. In this case, the Persian snake cucumber, which is not actually bad advice if you don't have antibiotics, because cucumbers are quite a nutritious food, but they're also soothe the stomach. They can, in certain cases, clear out certain parasites. Good advice, except his gardeners had a problem. They couldn't grow Persian snake cucumbers year-round. And so they were motivated by the emperor. Now, a good CEO knows how to motivate his team. And the emperor said, look, if you can't do this, I'm throwing you off this cliff. And there's a spot there called Tiberius's Leap, which is like a sheer drop into the ocean. And that's what happened to any employee he didn't like, as they went over that cliff. So the gardeners said, well, this is terrible. We're in a real jam here. And so they invented something called a specularium, which I find fascinating. And they were little carts full of dung covered in sheets of mica, which is a transparent rock. And they grew the cucumbers in those. They provided Tiberius with his daily cucumber, and they didn't get thrown off a cliff. And why I love telling this story, we invented greenhouses before we invented mass production of glass, and that is freaking amazing. And it worked. So we've come a long ways. In Canada, 2020, we produced 250,000 metric tons of greenhouse cucumber in this country with a value of $500 million. Tiberius would have been very pleased. We were a bit over 80% self-sufficient in Canada in cucumbers. We also have thriving greenhouse industries in tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. A lot of the technology in these industries coming from the Netherlands, which is a real world leader, and where they've really perfected indoor growing for over a century. Modern greenhouse, as you probably know, utilizes many controls. And that's what I said, it's chasing variables. We put in CO2 to double the CO2 concentration to improve output. We adjust temperature. We adjust humidity very carefully. It's actually the most important variable in most of these grows. And By doing this, by looking at lighting, by looking at genomics, we can produce at cost these vegetables with about a 500-fold increase in efficiency over field grown. And we end up with a product that looks a bit like this. I'm proud of this because I own a tiny percentage of each one of these lettuce, very small. But you can see this is Avery Farms' final product. It's really good and we're really proud. And it will be going on. I'm excited about it and talking about it because it's going into stores next week. And I feel like a bit like a parent, you know, you're sending your lettuce off to university, except it's not university, it's IGA. And you just want everyone to buy it and enjoy it and be like, wow, that's the best lettuce I've ever had. By the way, we actually did that trick to get some of our funding, is we brought a crap ton of our beautiful lettuce to the venture capitalist who was very skeptical. And we're like, look at the lettuce. And yeah, we got the investment. That's called using props to, you know, yeah. So what I love about this is it's using Japanese ebb and flow technology. So basically you got a big pool of water with styrofoam sheets, and the lettuce grows in little pucks embedded in those, floating along on the water, being lettuce. And you give it exactly the environment it wants and exactly the nutrients it wants. And you can grow one of these in about 25 days, which is fast for lettuce. And this is built on Japan's technology. And I want to, because of the nature of this talk, I'm trying to show you the things that I don't usually show to, say, industry partners, the why. Because the why is so interesting to us all, in that when I look at Japan, they didn't grow lettuce inside. But then when they had their tsunami and the Fukushima disaster, part of the retribution from the government, or not, part of the making up for that was funding this industry. They said, look, we've accidentally irradiated a giant area, but we're going to help make up for it. Any vertical farmer who wants to come and work in Japan will fund your company. You can lose as much money as you like. We will fund 100% while you do your R&D, while you get efficient, and then we'll slowly over 10 years wean you off that funding. And the result was probably the best indoor production industry on earth. Beautiful, beautiful stuff and all sorts of technologies, mostly run out of the University of Chiba in Tokyo, if you're curious. Leafy greens, spinach, bok choy, spring onions, strawberries. And they've started now to commercialize this technology for export. And we're actually one of the first non-Japanese groups to use this technology outside of Japan. And I'm liking it so far. So this is a tech that I think is coming fast. Obviously high quality. One of the push factors, though, is Salinas Valley. Salinas Valley produced at its peak probably about 90% of North America's lettuce. And that's been falling rapidly due to fire, due to drought, due to rising costs, due to insect infestation, a little guy called the thrip, which wreaks havoc with lettuce. No thrips in my building, by the way, it's sealed. And so we're seeing a fall off of how things were for 50 years. And it wasn't always thus. Before about the 30s, there was no lettuce industry in California. And so if it was winter and you were in New York or Montreal, you ate cabbage because that's what you had. And you did not have the luxury of eating these leafy greens. When the first rail cars of leafy greens packed on ice came in from Salinas to New York, it was a revelation. And that time is now fading. And instead, I was at Lufa Farm, some of you may know, this morning. That's where we're going to be getting our lettuce in the future. That's my kind of little soapbox. By the way, I'm not this soapboxy about all the tech. It's just this one's very near and dear to my heart. And So short term, we're going to grow a lot of things indoors as long as the cost is right. Now, next tech I want to talk about a little bit is different. It's a policy. And I think we are close in Canada. I mean, barring politics, which of course is the big thing to say, with establishing an actual working carbon economy. And a lot of very powerful people want this to happen. There is no question climate change is forcing us to rethink global food production at every level. We're seeing falling productivity. Now, let me be clear, for the last 10,000 years, productivity gains have been critical to feeding humanity, and we're still gaining. Every year we get better at producing more food with less input. But climate change is putting a drag on that. Our calculations show we're already losing about 21% of our gains every year from climate change. Each degree increase cuts 5% off of global food production. And that's becoming really scary to us all. And this is very personal to me in BC. British Columbia is like where you go to experience climate change now that you might experience somewhat later. We're besieged by forest fires. We have had, a few years ago, we had a heat dome where the temperature spiked 10 degrees Celsius, which if you'd asked me the day before whether that was possible, I'd have said no. The models don't allow it to get that hot, but there we are. Clearly our model is wrong because suddenly it was 10 degrees hotter. It was 41 degrees in Vancouver, which caused chaos. And for me, caused immediate farm chaos across pretty well every farm I work with. We had incredible crop loss, almost total in some categories. We had panicked farmers trying to figure out, what do we do? Because we're not built for this. We are getting crop burn, which we never see in BC, where you look at the apples and it's literally sunburn on one side. And if you want to know why I'm so scared of climate change, and I mean, every now and then someone from the right wing says, well, it's going to be great. We're Canada. It's cold. It'll get warmer. That's a win. Let's just let it happen. During those 2 or 3 days, every single person in Vancouver who had a heart attack died. There were an extra 3,000 deaths in the province because the healthcare system collapsed because no one has air conditioning out there, which might sound weird here, but we had a collapse of the 911 system. If you dial 911, you just got a busy signal. There were no ambulances, and so yeah, people died from the heat, and we lost tons of crops. Then immediately after that, everything flooded. My university became a small island in a 30 square kilometer lake. You probably heard about that one. We estimate about $5 billion in infrastructure damage that we're still fixing many years later. So clearly a problem. We need to get a handle on climate change. We need a price on carbon, but probably not a tax. Usually at this point, and when I give prairie talks, usually someone's throwing stuff at me. And I'm like, no tax. We're going to pay you to put things in the ground. And that's why I show this slide. That's the rainforest on one of my farms. It looks great. It looks beautiful. There's about that much soil. Looks like Mars under that. Prairie holds way more carbon. And if we look at prairie agriculture, and if we look at regenerative practice, which a lot of them are already doing with no-till, they're probably sequestering more carbon than we're putting out in our oil production already. And so we don't want them to stop, and we want them to do more. And we want to do more of this. This is regenerative agriculture. This picture is from Denmark. And they're grazing cattle in this landscape, and it starts to not look like a normal farming landscape. I'm a big fan of regenerative, but with the proviso, it doesn't scale the same way. So we have to rejig some things. But the only way people can make money doing this long term is if we're paying them for the carbon. And so, as some of you know, we need something called an MRV, a measure, report, and verify system, so we can put a number on what farmers are putting back. Farming is one of the only industries that can actually achieve negative carbon output in Scope 1 emissions. That is the actual on-the-ground emissions. They can literally reverse the problem. And so thank goodness farming is such a big industry, because it gives us a bit of hope. As you may know, the Royal Bank, through their Project Kanza, is trying to get one of these working for Canada. What's the problem? Why is this a future tech? Measuring carbon in the ground is really hard. You have to dig a hole, and it's not scalable in the way we need. So we need a technology, and there's a number of companies working on this, where you can measure CO2 being buried into the ground, or better yet, methane, with drones, or even better, satellite. And if we can do that, then we can create a system where a university like this could buy carbon credits from a Saskatchewan farmer. So the farmer is getting paid, the carbon is accounted for. That is what I think is coming in maybe 5 or 10 years. And it better, because otherwise we're probably all going to cook, and no one likes that. So then, because I know that of great interest to a lot of people is, what's next in meatballs? I mean, seriously, where are we going in this important side business in the food system, these small orbs of protein? What's new? Precision fermentation, which is one of my technologies I love. And so I want to talk a little bit about precision fermentation and this special meatball. This meatball is special because it is a plant-based meatball, and I know a lot of you are like, oh, it's going to taste like chickpeas or something boring like that. But it doesn't. It tastes like pork, because it's made with pork fat brewed in a vat in Berkeley by Mission Barns. And I had these last year for the first time. And as someone who eats predominantly plant-based, my first thought was like, oh, porky, so porky. That tastes like meat. And in America, that is what they're looking for. So you get all the benefits of a plant-based meatball with pork fat that was brewed out of carbohydrates in a vat. And to me, this is the most promising food tech on the 10 to 15 year scale. Key interest to our prairie region. And everyone's like, Lenore, what are you talking about? The people on the prairie aren't going to be eating weird California pork fat brewed sci-fi foods. And I'm like, no, they're not. But the prairies is a powerhouse of carbohydrates, and that's the fuel for this industry. So we grow, among other things, more lentils than anyone else on Earth. And when we process them and extract the protein, same with all our oats and our peas, we're left with waste starch. Right now, that waste starch isn't good for very much. We're trying to figure out what to do with it. One of the things we can do is feed it into precision fermentation to make new products. A number of government leaders and business leaders have been convening meetings to talk about, well, how do we do this? This technology falls under that larger umbrella of cellular agriculture, or the creation of animal products from non-animal feedstocks is the definition I like to use. Why is always the question you must ask in any food business. Why would I do this? Well, the short answer is this: the world wants animal protein. Much as I hate to admit it, we really do. We eat what is called a protein portfolio. And about half of the protein on Earth comes from plants. Always has, still does. So your chickpeas, your kidney beans, etc. Half. Little chunk, about 10 to 15%, comes from oceanic protein. And that piece is under threat because it's a wild harvest. The rest is animal protein, but all around the world, demand for animal protein is rising faster than we can scale animals. Because most of industry, at least from my lens, is a scaling problem. And boy, you can't scale a cow. It's a cow. It is a megafauna from the Paleocene. And you look at it and you're like, well, great. Now I got 2,000 pounds of animal and someone wants me to make it 10% more efficient so I can make more of them. How do I do that? Well, to date, we've done something really awful, which is increase our ag lands. I love this picture because it kind of shows the problem. So far, about 30% of all the land on Earth, maybe a little more, maybe 35, that is not covered in ice is agricultural land. By the way, this is why, as a trope, whenever aliens visit the Earth, they always land and meet a farmer. That's actually legit. Alien picked a random spot. Probably the first thing they're going to see is someone with a cow, because that's what most of the planet is. And this is a huge problem. We can't double it for the obvious reason. If we got rid of all the rest of our rainforest, our boreal forest, we still couldn't meet demand for animal proteins. We got to do it a different way. And why not just eat plants? We love cheese. We just love it. You can't make chickpeas do this. They just don't. It's sad, but it's true. And people want these high quality, the cultural. They want the cultural. They want the meat. They want the dairy. And they want it now, and they want it cheap. And this is a real problem. So we have shown, other than my hand waving, the group at Guelph, Dr. Evan Fraser's group, has shown that we can't actually scale the current system. So where do we get more animal protein from? Well, we grow it. And how we do that, I'm going off script for this because this I know well enough I can just chat about. So we've been doing this for a long time. And the little chain I like to take people through is when we developed insulin here in this lovely country, it was a huge breakthrough, saved millions of lives. We extracted that insulin from pork pancreas, and that was a problem. And we knew it was, but it's all we could do. Problem went like this. If you use insulin from pork pancreas, number one, the quality varies steeply. Number two, it creates allergies. After a while, it quits working because you become allergic to pork. Number three, not suitable for diets where pork isn't allowed. So, for example, for Islamic countries, etc. So what we did was really clever. We took bacteria and yeast, and they are little factories that make alcohol. Fermentation, oldest food technology there is. It makes us drunk, so we love it. Also does other things, but hey, it makes us drunk, so we love it. And we're like, well, we can take these little organisms that are basically factories that take carbohydrates and sugars and create alcohol. Let's teach them to make other things. By the way, I'm so vastly simplifying one of the most complex bits of science done last century that just understand that part. This was not trivial. But first Nobel Prize in genetic engineering was to create a bacteria that created insulin, and that's how all insulin is made. And that is amazing. Fast forward to the 80s. Those of us alive remember, amazing decade, really big cell phones, really big hair. And we ran into a problem in that the world ate so much cheese that we no longer had enough natural rennet to make it. As you may know, cheese is made with a coagulant, a catalyst in scientific terms. The catalyst is actually called chymosin, and it's found in the second stomach of ruminants. And so in the old days, to make cheese, we scraped that lining of that second stomach, mixed it in with our milk, separates into curds and whey. You get the whole Miss Muffet thing. That's like, once again, old tech. So they're like, well, how do we make this? Same thing. They took yeast and bacteria and spliced in the gene for chymosin expression. It creates a product called vegetable rennet. Most cheese on earth is now made this way, about 80% of cheese. If you're buying like Parmigiano Reggiano or like a Camembert or something, it's still made with animal rennet. But most cheese, you're using precision fermentation, genetic technology, and no one cares, because they're just happy because they want to go to the store and buy a cheap block of cheese. Or in BC, they want to drive to America and get an even cheaper block of cheese and hide it under the stuff in their car and smuggle it back in, thus defeating supply management. So it just goes to show you what the public wants. And so the question we've now arrived at is, what else can we do? Because dairy is a tough business, anyone who's ever been in it. In most of the world, it's a really tough business. Here we have supply management, a little better. And so when I look at dairy, I know that dairy alone, a product that a good part of the world can't even eat because of lactose intolerance, 2 to 4% of greenhouse gas emissions from one product. So the obvious question is, how do we do it better? Well, we could teach yeast and bacteria to be a cow. And that's what we do. And that is 10 to 15 years, I still say, although it's a product you can buy. So what do? You splice in the gene for whey production and the gene for casein production. There's 3 casein proteins. I won't go too deep into the detail, but there's a raft of proteins, and that's what you actually need. Once you have the proteins, you can add in the sugars, you can add in the fats. Maybe you made them at Mission Barns. And so fast forward, we're now doing that at commercial scale just. So if I go to the US, I walk into Kroger's, I can buy an ice cream called Brave Robot. It's made with animal-free dairy. And that is whey protein produced by a bacteria. By the way, Perfect Day, the company that does it, calls the bacteria Buttercup, which I think is kind of cute. Still kind of the scaling state. To put my industry hat on, when you buy that ice cream and you eat it, Perfect Day lost some money. You're eating venture capital is what you're eating, but every product starts that way. And we're going to see a lot more. Cheese is harder because casein proteins on their own don't make cheese. They have to form little globules. That's a terribly imprecise, but it's really hard to describe. But they form globules. And there are companies now that have got this working. They're going to start making mozzarella. And you're like, why mozzarella? Why mozzarella? Well, industrial mozzarella is a big piece of the dairy industry because pizza, because pizza. That's enough. We can stop there. It's a popular food. And also mozzarella only takes a day to make. So Parmigiano Reggiano, that's a 3-year project. Mozzarella, you're done tomorrow. And so definitely you can see why. So cellular agriculture definitely coming. Meat is harder, and I don't want to go too much into it other than I have had the great pleasure to eat salmon that grew in a vat. And 2 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I think. I'm a fisherman's daughter, and this has caused all sorts of problems in my brain. And I'm like, what did I just eat? Like, was it a plant? Was it an animal? Was it a fungus? I don't know. I'm at the kingdom level of confusion. And that is a weird thing. So what about if we go even further forward? Because I want to keep going forward as we wrap into the downward side of this talk. I hate doing this. I hate when people ask me what's 20 or 30 years out. So I don't know. I might be picking through a wasteland, looking through old Walmarts for like a canned good. Or I might be on Mars. I don't know. You'd ask me 30 years ago, would I be carrying around the sum total of human knowledge in my hand, and would I mostly use it to look at cats? No, didn't seem, I mean, flying cars, sure, I thought I'd have those. Didn't think I'd have as many cat pictures as I could ever want. But I'm willing to go out on a limb and say one thing that will develop over the next 20 to 30 years is this, genomics, which is already going like crazy. I think we're going to see some really cool genomics continue along. Now, this isn't new, and you're like, oh, come on, Lenore. We've been doing genomics for 10,000 years. And yes, we have. And it's why we're still fed. It's why Malthus was wrong, and why we can actually feed more people with less land. We actually think we're at about peak farmland. And if everything goes according to plan, we will start to use less and less of the world's land for farms. And this is already happening to a degree. And food will continue to get cheaper, just not right now. Not right now. Keep getting expensive for a little while. And you can see some of this. In the last century, wheat yield has gone up by 250% per acre. Corn yield has gone up 500% per acre, mostly through breeding. There is currently work to do non-GMO breeding on corn that would splice in a gene from a corn from South America that produces its own nitrogen fertilizer. It has a symbiote that works with it, so we could lower our input costs even more. But there is one aspect we have barely touched. Why are we doing this? Remember, I always ask that why question. The less land we can use, the better, because we can then do more regen. We can also rewild. And I had to show this off because I live in part of the country where we have one of the world's only wild bison herds that's free ranging. So it's the Norquest herd. I'm in a car with my engine idling so I can get away if he decides he doesn't like me. We can have more of these guys. Because these guys, I mean, look at them. They're great. As I've always said, hey, you rewild enough, you can, like, people will pay big money to come and look at these lovely bison. And I always see them as such a sign of hope because the species came so close to extinction, down to about 500 individuals. Now there are thousands of them. And we'd do more of that. So how do we do that? We have not yet done much on photosynthesis. And that's one of the low-hanging but very hard problems left for genetics. And what I'm getting at there is plants aren't very efficient in terms of conversion. About 3 to 6% of the photoelectric energy that hits them is turned into actual plant. And they don't need to be more efficient than that because they got other problems. They're creating interesting little chemicals to ward off pests. They're adapting to climate. They're busy. They're using just enough photosynthesis. But it makes a scientist think, 3 to 6%. What could I get? Could I teach that plant to maybe not worry about predators so much and increase that number? And the answer is maybe. And some of that work, some of this work I'm trying to, this is very hard to explain, but there's one bit that I can kind of get at, is there's a mechanism by which plants use carbon dioxide. That when the temperatures rise too much, they react because they don't want to lose water. Remember, they're trying not to lose their liquid. They close up their little stoma, where their stomata, the pores in the leaves, to conserve moisture. And it throttles their ability to absorb CO2. And so they get less efficient. And there are some plants called C4 plants that are better at this. They actually can keep using CO2, keep photosynthesizing at full speed, even when it's warm. And only about 3% of flowering plants are C4, but they're doing about 20% of the photosynthesis on Earth. And so several scientific teams, a lot of them funded by Bill Gates, are looking at how could we take our major crops and teach them to be C4 plants. I don't know. It seems a little Star Trek to me, but we believe we could get another 40% increase in yield. And right now, that would be massive and very timely. So I'm into that kind of 5-minute roundup. So we have a lot of time for questions. I love questions. What do we do as Canadians, as people working in industry? Well, number one, there's salmon grown in a vat, just so you've seen it. I'm still not sure what I think about that. I have a lot of complex feelings about that. But say we move all these technologies forward, what role can Canada take? Well, I've been partnering with University of Guelph on a project called Feeding the Future with Canadian Technology. Our report is coming out in the next few weeks, hopefully. And what we're saying is, well, how does Canada take a bigger piece of the pie? Because we should. We're an ag superpower. We produce a great number of calories, and we're pretty much, I think we're usually 5th or 6th in ag production globally. But then we fall off. We're about 8th globally in funding for agricultural research, and that number is going down. So that's a problem. But where it gets really scary, we're about 19th in actual conversion of base research, discovery research, to actual R&D that leads to minimum viable products and patents. And the line I usually say when I'm talking to government is Canada produces academic papers, but we don't produce patents. And that's a huge problem. And the problem there is we tend to train really good people that then go elsewhere. I mean, myself included, I did that. And we don't want that to happen so much. We want that industry here. In the last 5 years, there's been about $36 billion US in venture capital go into ag tech. And only 3% of it went to Canada. The bulk of it, about 60% of it, went to the US. The bulk of that went to California. And so the question is, what do we do? Well, we have spent the last couple of years, Guelph and my shop, doing consultations, talking to hundreds of industry players to synthesize what we think we're missing. What we know, we need to do a better job of training. We need to train people, especially in STEM, to have more grounding in business. We need to make sure that base science is a fundamental part of everything we're doing too. And one of the programs I hold up as a like, wow, this works really great is MyTech. I know I can say that here and not have to explain it. Most of you know what the MyTech program does. It partners academia and industry to get people training with a foot in both camps, which to be honest made my career. So I'm a big fan of it. But I have watched my MyTech's postdocs go on to do really amazing things because they learn to not be scared of whichever piece they're not familiar with. So what I find in Canada, a lot of industry side, they're really skeptical and scared of academy. A lot of academy people are really scared of industry and skeptical of industry. They need to understand these two things have to work together. You can't build an ecosystem without the other. And they understand this in places like the US. We need to look at policy. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but a lot of my working time is arguing with government about policy. And the problem in Canada is a lot of the policy hasn't kept up with the technology, so we're constantly chasing. Brief example from the lettuce front was I was working with a company selling indoor grown lettuce, And we ran into the weird problem. There was a policy in an obscure branch of the government of BC that said lettuce had to have a certain weight to be sold, but it was based on field grown. And what field grown had that their lettuce didn't was a giant root ball full of dirt. And so our lettuce didn't weigh enough because it didn't have a giant root ball full of dirt. And so we had to tweak the policy. It took like a year and a half of my life. And we need to find a way to do that faster because every single piece of the ag industry is running into these little bits of red tape that really just need to be wrapped up. Now, with my academic hat on, what I would love to see is every government policy have an expiry date, so that if it wasn't being used and it wasn't mission critical, like say, don't put lead in the milk, it would just expire and go away. But instead, it just accumulates till eventually you've got 100 years of tangled policy. So every time you try and do something new, you work through you got all these surprises. And even the government can't really tell you what's going to happen until you've already put $10 million into a facility and someone says, oh, this weird branch over here says you can't do it. That is something we need to work on. Funding. Where I'll end off, Canada actually has a lot of funding, but it's not well organized. That's what the answer we heard. It's spotty. If you're sitting in Guelph and you're under Omafra, you're golden. You're golden. People are literally dumping money on you. If you're in Newfoundland trying to grow carrots inside, I feel for you. And so it varies by province. There's a lot of one-off programs. Any of you, one-off programs, big problem. So we need a lot of things. We need policy. We need commitment. The real leaders in ag tech globally right now are the countries that have stood up and said, we're going to lead in ag tech. That's literally a requirement. And that's part of the reason Silicon Valley in California is an ag player, because they've stood up and said, hey, we're the world's ag powerhouse. We're also the tech powerhouse. Together at last, let's roll. So that's what I see in the future, and I'm really looking forward to talk to you. I will acknowledge some of the random people that are foolish enough to give me money, which I then spend looking at things like space vegetables, which is in the book. But I must say I've been very privileged to work with industry and with government to look at these problems, and I'm still an optimist. I think there's no reason Canada shouldn't be the world's leading food powerhouse, and maybe we get there one day, but I'm not going to put a date on that because that's how you get proven wrong. Okay, what do people want to ask me? Because I think it's time for questions. Or you go, is something I need to do, or we all good? Questions, comments?
Yeah, well, we'll start with, I guess, some questions. So.
Yes.
So when you've got your plants growing inside hydroponic situations, what sort of risk do you have for disease, and what are the ramifications of disease in a closed system like that?
None if you're smart and careful, and that's what you want. You want zero outbreak, because then you're pesticide free, and a failure is very expensive because everything's connected. So, and this is why I like controlled environment or vertical compared to greenhouse, because it's very hard to biosecure a greenhouse well enough that you're not going to get plagued by mosaic, by all these terrible things that come and kill all your identical plants, because let's be honest, nature hates a monoculture. So for example, the facility in BC I work with, we probably have a similar biosecurity regime to, a disease lab. So I'm pretty sure we're not going to have a pest outbreak inside, because we've taken enough precautions so it won't happen. If it does happen, you got to shut down, scrub, start all again. That's really expensive. And I am sometimes really shocked by the lack of biosecurity in vertical agriculture, because it's like, I'm like, guys, the risk is really high. Rigorous testing for everything, of course, including salmonella, which is the one we're always very frightened of. But yeah, almost all your protection is going to come at the front end, making sure the disease never comes in the door.
I have a question and also maybe comment. So in your precision fermentation, how much grain, if you want to make animal proteins, how much grain do you need?
How much grain do you
So
need
we
to make
can say
animal
1 kilogram.
proteins?
Oh, a conversion rate. Depends what you're doing, so it's hard to give an exact answer. I would say the thing is you don't want grain. And that's the wrong way to think of it. You want waste product. You want sugar or starch is what you want, which is,
Exactly.
well,
Sugar is around $200 a
yeah, not the sugar. That's why the prairies are pursuing this so hard, is they're looking for a market for the dross. Is, yeah.
nitrogen based, common based. Where do you get the nitrogen from?
Where do you get
That's
the
a good
nitrogen
question.
from?
I've never really thought about it.
This will come from
Yeah,
the protein from the grains. All right.
yeah.
And also how much energy do you need?
How much
And
energy
what
do
is
you
the capital
need?
investment?
CapEx is huge. And that's the big problem with this.
So you have a 200,000 liters fermenter, will cost you about $500 million.
Exactly.
$50 in mortgage fees and so on, right? Now, that's the question. The other government comment.
I'm going to dig in on that for a bit, because now you've asked one of the most important questions. And the romantic in me would love to see microbrewery style, but I know that's not what it's going to be. The only way it makes sense is massive. And what by that I mean we're looking at 500 million, $1 billion investment, which means we're talking about things like the Canada Investment Bank, major venture capital. It's why it's not going to happen now. Exactly. And it's exactly why, like the first startup I ever worked with, we were trying to send photos over the internet and all we had is dial-up. And so we were doomed. We didn't know we were doomed because we were 20. But we were doomed. And you would have looked at me and said, well, this is an impossible business model. Same thing. If someone came to me and said they wanted to do this at scale tomorrow, I don't think we're quite there. And the answer to your question.
Your conversion rate from grain to chicken meat, for example, is only 1.7 kilograms or 1 gram, right? And if you had catfish, you get down to even, 1-to-1 roughly. So the other ways of getting animal proteins a lot cheaper.
Oh, sure. But problem is the customer doesn't want catfish. So yeah, you have proposed another way to solve the problem, which is teach North Americans, like I'll be honest, the easiest solution is just get everyone to eat plants. I mean, it's way easier, but unfortunately they won't do it. They want chicken. What's worse, they want beef. And so, I'm not here to fight for an industry, because at the end of the day, I chart the arc of history. There is a possibility cell ag might just be an interesting side note in the history of protein. We might literally decide, let's all go vegan, because God, it's sure easier. But it's not going to happen today. So we're playing with something that's interesting. And that's what technology does. And the reason I'm pushing back a bit is I've been through a few of these on the industry side. And yeah, everyone told us we were crazy when we were trying to get the internet to do things for the public. And they were right. But 20 years later, it's different. But it could have worked out where cell phones never worked, where the internet online never worked, where streaming never worked. I don't know. Right now, if I had to put money into it, which I wouldn't, because I think it's too risky, I'd be looking at very large facilities that are funded by government, the way that oil is. Like if you think about it, what you're describing to me, you're describing fractional distillation. Like we only do it because we have to and the government subsidizes it, if you want to think of it that way. So big scale, maybe, or continuous fermentation. There's potential there, but it's really hard. And I know you're going to think it's hard. I mean, there's a reason we brew beer in batches for the most part.
And I got a comment. I don't know of any alternative protein that's produced by bacteria or even yeast, right? And also, I don't think Perfect Day ever claimed that ice cream to non-animal protein involved. In that ice cream, there's only one alternative protein that's made,
Yes.
and that's made by fungus.
Yep.
And this is only minor one. I think it's a beta lactoalkaline. None of the casein,
None of the casein. And the casein is hard.
So, you know, I think if I'm gonna form a company, I would love to have you to do the promotion. But the truth of the matter is, all these are right now just so aspirational. And the cost and things, I mean, I'm very fed up with our government investing on Perfect Day, you know, our pension plan. It's not getting there. It's just all PR.
What would you say if I told you every single technology we have ever done is exactly that?
No.
The first 10, 20 years.
Certainly.
I mean,
We need to be a little bit more honest about it. It's not that I don't believe in it.
yeah, now what did I say? I said 10 to 15 years, maybe.
Technology, just like I made enough alternative protein in my lab, okay?
Yeah, it's hard.
We do these things, but we need to, when we do these things, need to be honest about it. And instead of throwing these big numbers and come with these things, and here also maybe the people in this room, and our companies say, they're making cheese already. They haven't made anything, right? So just, if we're gonna, that's why people get this interest in it. They find out this is SPS, and then we don't go for it. It's not that I don't believe, I certainly believe in it. But the issue is, right now, we're not there, just.
So I want to flip this on you, because I think this is a teaching moment, because you're seeing two worlds collide. I am, at heart, an industry girl. And so it is my job to pursue the impossible to a degree. But as someone with a foot in academia, a bit of me thinks like you and thinks, well, this is total insanity. Why are we wasting money on it? So I got to ask you, do you think, no, just let me finish, because I am at the front, so I get to finish. My question to you, would you ban research into it? Would you ban funding of it? Would you say this is so unlikely we should put the money into something else instead? Housing would be a good one because we all need it. Like that's a deeper question I want to ask about innovation, because what you're picking at is a really interesting point about the way we do innovation in North America. What do you think? If you had the hammer, if I gave you the ability to say no more money to this, would you say that, or would you keep putting money into it, see what would happen?
I am promoting innovation, promoting science, but I'm not promoting lies. Okay.
Do you think they're lying?
Well, to say, you just say, like, some of these measures, you say, you grow a lettuce, it is 500 times more productivity in a greenhouse than outside. How does that measure? And also say,
inland
ice cream is totally made on animal protein. That's, I'm not saying lie, but certainly an alternate truth. Right? There's only one minor protein which is there making the fungus. And that's what I'm trying to say is that it's not that I work in research, I also work in this area. I certainly want more money in research in this area because I believe in it. All right. But I do not believe in all these other things that are just not there.
See, a lot of people disagree with you, though.
Oh, certainly,
And
I'm glad that people disagree. There's no.
Oh, you don't sound very glad.
No,
It's-
if I only argue with myself all the time, I won't.
No, it is true. And I'm actually kind of, believe it or not, although you make my day harder, I'm glad you're here because it is a challenge. Because the nature of the innovation cycle in North America is that it's exuberance followed by crash. It's very emotional, and it is a challenge. Now, when I showed you that lettuce farm, which exists, which is profitable, which I put my own money into, the technology we use was Japanese for a reason, because it's a much more conservative venture capital market. So the technology has been built a little more slowly, a little more carefully. It's why I didn't run down to California to buy that tech, because I'm kind of with you there. When I'm putting my money hat on shopping for tech, I'm real skeptical of some of those things. And yeah, if someone came in and told me tomorrow, hey, Lenore, if you find me $100 million, I'll build a factory that pumps out mozzarella tomorrow, I'd say, no, you won't. There's no way. Absolutely no way. Do I support venture capitalists dumping some money into it in case it works in 10 or 15 years? Sure. That's how it works. That's why I have a cell phone. And, you know, back when I was pitching that first company to move to share photos, that was a hard sell because it took 4 or 5 hours to move photo. And I needed a fundamental shift in how that tech worked. I needed fiber optic is what I needed. And what I had was copper wire that at best I could send a few signals on at once. And
My major problem is this. When you people just say, I write a grant to make this alternative protein, and they say, oh, this company is already making cheese and making.
that's an interesting one.
You know, then my funding got cut off. Right? So that's my problem.
So you would say the industry's gotten a bit ahead of the science, and that hurts the science.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. Anyone else who isn't a professor, maybe? So I'm just teasing you. I actually think we play an important role because we do throttle this. And I will say, and I've been a bit aspirational today, a lot of my job with government is to hold them in, is to say, no, for the love of God, don't put a bunch of funding into that because it's not ready. And instead put money here, here, and there. And then they don't listen to me and they do whatever they want because they're chasing their own outcomes to a degree. Sometimes they listen. And I hate to tell you this, they're probably going to put more money into this from our pensions. And so we got to just hope it works. But other questions from the audience?
I think we're also getting to the end of our time, so I encourage anybody who's got further questions or wants to maybe engage in some further discussion to come on up and see Lenore. And otherwise, I thank you all for joining me today in the audience here and also online. So thank you very much. And with that, we will conclude our talk.
Okay, thank you to everyone. Very specifically, thank you to Orly, to Zoe, and to Kathleen for organizing these 3 days of events here for SynBio. Thanks for coming into Fourth Space, and thank you to those who joined us online. We will be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but a quick reminder that this is already available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. Please join us again here at Fourth Space. We'll catch you at the next one. Have a great weekend.